Get your Bibles out. Recall our study is upon the characteristics of the wicked. Turn, if you will, over to the book of Psalms and go to Psalm 59. Recall that we're looking at characteristics of the wicked. We've already observed the characteristics of the Lord, Jesus Christ, his characteristics, his holy characteristics, and then we looked at characteristics of the saved or the Christian. And now we're looking at the opposite side of the coin, the characteristics of the wicked. I mean, we'll always say that even though we're pointing out these character traits in the wicked, we're not making fun of them, but we're warning them that these characteristics are signs of judgment and punishment to come, and that God will judge them, and that God will find them guilty, and that God will punish them in that place called, ultimately, the lake of fire. So the first consideration this morning that I would have you look at, Psalm 59, verse 12. Psalm 59, verse 12. And that is that the wicked are proud. The wicked are proud. Look what it says in verse number 12. For the sin of their mouth and the words of their lips, let them even be taken in their what? Pride. See that? Let them even be taken in their pride, and for cursing and lying which they speak. And notice what he calls for in verse 13. Consume them in what? Thy wrath. Now, this is what you would call an imprecatory psalm. Now, we're not supposed to pray for God's judgment and fire to fall upon them. What are we supposed to pray? Anybody remember? We're supposed to pray for God's love and grace and mercy to fall upon them, that they indeed would be saved before they face this judgment of God's wrath. All right? So this is what's called an imprecatory psalm. But remember, Jesus says for us to pray for those that spitefully use you, to pray for those and give them a cup of water and share your gospel testimony with them. It's important that we do so because one day they are going before that great judgment seat, that great white throne, and their books will be opened and their works out of those books will be judged, each and every one. And I like to remind folks this, that one day you're going to stand before God, and from the time you're born until the time you die, every single sin or offense against God is going to be judged for. Not only will it be judged, it's guaranteed that you will be found guilty, and that the punishment for being found guilty is that you be cast into the lake of fire, where you will be destroyed eternally. Now again, we like to point out and remind people that when you're cast into the lake of fire, you're not burnt up like a piece of chicken. No. If you let that chicken cook too long, what happens to it? It starts getting dark, and eventually it'll get hard and black, and it won't be fit for nothing. Well, in the lake of fire, the lost are going to be placed in there, and they're never going to be destroyed, but they will always be tormented. They'll never be completely destroyed, but they will be tormented, and that's what this is saying. Consume them in wrath, consume them that they may not be. Let them know that God ruleth in Jacob unto the ends of the earth. He says, let them know that there still is a God. And that's important, and that's our responsibility, is to let people know there's still a God, there's still a judge, and there's still going to be a judgment that is to come. So let us warn them about their pride and their destruction to come. And then I want you to look over at 2 Timothy chapter 3. You hear me reading this verse a lot, or these verses in 2 Timothy 3 a lot. The reason why is because it's a signs of the times that we're in. 2 Timothy chapter 3. And I'll go ahead and start in verse 1 to show you the context. It says, "This know also, that in the last days," what kind of times shall come? Perilous times. And the word perilous means fraught with danger, hard, terrible, awful times. And I submit to you, we're in those times now. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1. And then verse 2, it says, "For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters," and here's the word, "proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, high-heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof. From such turn away." Now I want you to look at that. This is the last days he's speaking to Timothy about, way back almost 2,000 years ago. Think about it. Paul's saying that's a sign of the last times. And I want you to consider these verses against the truth of today. Compare these verses to the conditions of our society today. And I think you will find, even with a liberal mind, I think you would find that every one of these verses holds true today. Every characteristic we see here mentioned holds truth today. And the one we're looking at this morning in particular is that one of the proud. And that's what we find there in verse 2. It says, "Boasters, proud, blasphemers." You see, not only are men wicked, not only do they enjoy sin and love sin, but they're also proud that they're sinners. They brag about their sin. They boast about their sin. They're not ashamed of their sin. Rather, they glory in their own shame. And that's a sign of the times that we live in. Men are proud of their sin. Now let's go to a second one. Look at the idea over in Isaiah chapter 1. Now Isaiah was a prophet, a man of God. He was called by God to be a prophet, anointed by God to be a prophet. And Isaiah filled his commission completely by prophesying for God. Now look at Isaiah 1 and look at verse 2. "Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord hath spoken. I have nourished and brought up children," and look what it says, "and they have" what? "Rebelled against" who? Me. Now this is the Lord speaking through Isaiah. And what's he saying that his people have done? They've rebelled. One of those things about rebellion is it shows a sign of the true hearts of the people. Rebellion means to transgress, to offend, to revolt, and to apostatize. Now, does everybody know what apostasy means? That means falling away from God. And when you're falling away from God, what are you falling unto? You're following unto the earth and the ways of this earth and those principalities and powers of this earth. So look what it says again. It says, "Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord hath spoken. I have nourished and brought up children, and they have rebelled against me." And think about this. God has treated Israel well. You think about Abraham, from the time of Abraham to the time of Moses, and then the time of Joshua. Joshua brought them into the promised land. He brought them across the Jordan River on dry ground, just like Moses brought them across the Red Sea on dry ground. They went into that promised land, and they took possession of the promised land. And they cast lots, and they inherited their different sections, their different tracts of land. They all got a piece of that land of milk and honey. And boy, what's the first thing they start doing? Turning against God, setting up false gods, setting up pagan gods, setting up all of these lies and vanities that call themselves gods. And they began to turn their back on God. Rebellious, transgressing, offending God. You think about that. Here he had brought them up and given them everything they needed. You think about the wilderness journey from Exodus, from Egypt. Remember that as they were walking through that wilderness, their feet, their shoes never wore out. You think about the clothes that were on their back. They never got a hold of them. They never wore out. Boy, now that's something to think about today. How would you like to have a clothing that never wore out? Or shoes that never, boy, that'd save you a lot of money, wouldn't it? But not only that, he provided food for them every day. And water for them every day. He provided water for them. And what happened? Oh, boy, there's always murmuring, complaining. And sometimes we need to remind ourselves of that. We do the same thing as children of God. We just complain about the rain. We complain about the sun. We complain about the heat. We complain about the cold. We complain about the dry. We complain about everything. We're just like those children of Israel there in that wilderness journey. And God might just have to take us out to get our attention. But you see, the point is that they were rebelling against God. It wasn't so much that it was just that they were complaining. They were complaining against God and saying, you're not doing right by us. You're not caring for us enough. You're not giving us what we want. So they were rebellious. Then look over at chapter 30 in the same book. Chapter 30, Isaiah 30. Isaiah 30. And look down, if you will, to verse number 9. Isaiah 30, verse 9. He says that this is a rebellious people. Think about it. Lying children. Children that will not hear the law of the Lord. Now, see what God's saying? They're rebellious. Not only are they rebellious, but they won't listen. They've stopped their ears up. They won't listen to God. Now, they'll listen to the world and the crowd from the world. They say, oh, we want to have a king. Oh, we want to have all the things like these other kingdoms have. We want to do it like the world does it. But you remember, God called them out to be a holy people. God called them to be a special people. His own priests and kings were to go forth into the rest of the world and preach deliverance through God. But no, instead they turned inward, they turned religious, and they turned against God. So they were rebellious. And then there's another one in Psalms I wanted you to see that's important for us to remember. Psalm 35. Psalm 35. And verse 15. Psalm 35, verse 15. But in my adversity, they what? Rejoiced. See that? In my adversity, they rejoiced. Now think of this. Here you are going through a hard time. Here you are suffering an affliction, a disease, an infirmity. And what are the lost or the wicked doing? They're rejoicing. They're making fun of you. They're belittling you. And he says here in our text, he says again, they've gathered themselves together. Yea, the abjects gathered themselves together against me, and I knew it not. They did tear me and ceased not. Now what that means by tearing, it brings to idea the lion. All right? When you think about the devil as a roaring lion, what does he say he does? He says, he seeketh about, seeking to devour those whom he will. He roareth. So, when you think about a lion, how does a lion eat? He grabs that thing with his teeth and he just chomps down until that animal dies. And then he tears that flesh apart. Well, David is telling you this is how he feels when he's not there, but they have gathered together, and what do they love to eat? They like to tear me up like flesh. They like to destroy me with their words. They like to mock me and make fun of me, and I'm trying to live right for God. Look what it says, verse 16, with hypocritical mockers in feast, they gnashed upon me with their teeth. See that? They're chewing on me. They're having me for supper. Instead of praying for David, instead of trying to encourage him and help him, man, they're trying to tear him up and destroy him. And that shows you what kind of nature they have. If they've got the nature of a lion, that shows you they're not living right. They're supposed to be gentle. They're supposed to be loving and caring like sheep, not lions. But you know what? One day, our great lion, the Lion of Judah, will come and destroy them. And they will be gnashing their own teeth, gnashing their own tongue, gnawing in pain for the judgment that comes upon them. So they rejoice. These wicked people rejoice in our afflictions. And then one more I want you to look at, and that's the idea of a reprobate. 2 Corinthians chapter 13. 2 Corinthians chapter 13. Now, of course, if you have time, you can look over at Romans chapter 1 and look at the description of a reprobate. But I want you to look at 2 Corinthians 13, verse 5. 2 Corinthians 13, verse 5. Second Corinthians 13 and verse 5. Look what it says. Examine yourselves. Now what's that mean? Look within. Check yourself out. Be honest. Evaluate yourself. Examine yourselves whether ye be in the faith. Prove your own selves. Know ye not your own selves how that Jesus Christ is in you, except ye be what? Reprobates. But I trust that ye shall know that we are not reprobates. Now, what is a reprobate? A reprobate is somebody that has been cast away by God. Somebody that has been rejected. Somebody that is unapproved by God. Now, what's he saying here? Check your own heart out. Make sure you belong to Jesus. Make sure you belong to Christ. Make sure that you are His and He is yours. Why? Because if you're in a reprobate condition, that means you're already cast out. You're already judged. You're already condemned. You're merely awaiting the sentence that is yours. And then go ahead and turn back to 2 Timothy 3. There's another word there that you can look at. 2 Timothy 3. This will be our last one. 2 Timothy 3. And look down to verse 8. Now as Jannes and Jambres withstood Moses, so do these also, what? Resist the truth. Now that word resist means what? They fight against it. You know, every day we get police officers bringing prisoners in and say, oh, they resisted. How'd they resist? They were fighting me. They were punching me. They were kicking me. They were biting me. All these kind of different things that a prisoner will do trying to get out of getting arrested. Now notice the two men are named here, from Exodus, Jannes and Jambres were the two magicians of Pharaoh's court that were brought to withstand against Moses. And they brought their snakes, and Moses brought his stick. And Moses turned his stick into a snake, and they turned their sticks into snakes. And what happened? Moses' stick / snake consumed the other two. They ate them, which was designed to show us that no matter who you are, like Pharaoh, when you stand against God, you will be destroyed and consumed. Look what he says again at the rest of the verse. It says, as Jannes and Jambres withstood Moses, so do these also resist the truth. Men of what kind of minds? Corrupt minds. Reprobate concerning what? The faith. They don't have the faith. They don't have the truth. They don't hold to the truth. They trust in lies of the devil. They trust in lies of the world. They trust in lies of men, and they are reprobate. And woe to that man that is a reprobate, because that means he's already been found guilty. He's already been rejected by God. He has rejected God, and therefore God has rejected him. Remember, Jesus said that men are condemned already unless they believe in Jesus Christ. So as we think about this, the characteristics of the wicked, we see pride, rebellion, rejoicing in the afflictions of saints, and we see reprobate minds. According to the standards of God, they've been cast away, for they're rejecting the truth. So I want you to think about that this morning. And then as you think about that, remember, all of us have family members that are still lost. All of us have people, friends, neighbors, communities around us that have lost people in them. And let us be careful to try to lift the gospel message to them, be a witness and testify to them, be a witness to the co-workers that we come in contact with, etc., and tell them and warn them about the judgment that's coming and about being wicked instead of being one of God's chosen people, and that they need to repent, call upon the name of the Lord, and they can still be saved unless they're reprobate, which means God's already cast them into rejection. But we still don't know who those are, but we can say you still need to be saved before it's eternally too late. Think about that this morning. Let's all stand. We'll close with the word of prayer.